Good afternoon, Mr. Professor. Thank you for your time. And let's get started with the hot issue now. The situation in the Middle East remains unstable and oil price continues to rise. So what impact will this have on global trade and economic growth?
I think in terms of the economic effects, they'll be more pronounced the longer it goes on. I think the global economic growth will be adversely affected. How big that adverse effect is depends on how long it goes on. But some countries right now are being more adversely affected by the energy disruption, and their energy prices are going up faster. And that has a short-term immediate impact on the cost of production and the expenses of households trying to pay for these things. But again, if it's a month, that's not too bad in terms of the negative effects. Not great, but not too bad. If it goes on, then the effects get bigger and they accumulate and they get exponentially bigger. Well, this is a dilemma for central banks, right? Because this is a supply shock, so the cost of energy is going up. Many advanced economies have reduced the reliance on energy to produce things. Part of that's a shift from manufacturing to services, service-intensive economies. So for some countries, the impact's not that big. For other countries, it's bad. There's still cost-price pressures because even if you're not spending directly on energy, petroleum, oil goes into many other products, plastics, metals. I mean, it's used in many different ways in many different products. Fertilizers, I think that's a very important part for agriculture. So the longer it goes on, the more those costs go up. The more those costs go up, this cost price inflation, the more central banks have to either pause on rate cuts or increase rates to try to squeeze inflation out.
You've talked about re-globalization. So how is it different from past globalization, especially with rising geopolitical tensions?
Re-globalization is essentially a reorganization of globalization. Globalization is not going away. The latest report that I edited, the Global Value Chain Development Report for 2025, actually articulates very clearly that global value chains and the trade flows around those have been sustained. It's just that they've been reorganizing because of the geopolitical tensions and uncertainty post-COVID. Many firms are looking for more resilient production sources, so they're diversifying, in some cases nearshoring, in a few cases reshoring. And that's resulted not in a decline in global trade, but a reorganization of it. So I think that's a positive sign that the global economy can be resilient. I do worry that this may not be the most efficient way to bring about resilience. I think many countries want resilience, both for their firms in terms of economic production, but also for national security concerns. And I think it's important that countries find ways to cooperate around building more resilience into the global economy, but doing so in a relatively efficient, cost-effective way.
How do you see the current state of the WTO and the multilateral trading system, and what's the biggest barrier to reform?
I think the biggest barrier to reform for the WTO is countries being frustrated with the lack of progress there. And countries have been able to make progress in regional trade agreements and bilateral trade agreements. But because the WTO operates on a consensus basis, any country can block new issues that a large number of members may want to talk about and try to find ways to negotiate. But because of the consensus mechanism, any country that wants to can block that discussion. And what we've seen is countries blocking discussions on new issues because there are still issues unresolved from the past. And unresolved from the creation of the WTO in 1995. The global economy has really moved on. So there needs to be a way to help resolve the old issues, but also address the new issues.
Will critical supply chains in new energy, semiconductors, and other areas see partial decoupling or full fragmentations?
So this is where I think these national security concerns are arising, right? So countries want to be able to have a reliable source and not be subjected to potential political squeezing by other countries. There's this phrase out there in the international relations field called weaponized interdependence. And as the world has become globally integrated, countries have discovered that they hold key positions in certain supply chains that other countries are dependent on, and they can try to use those pressure points to extract concessions that they want. The U.S. was one of the first ones to use these around the financial system and dollarization and SWIFT, the SWIFT process. And this is where resilience can really matter. If there's multiple sources, efficient multiple sources of these products, but right now I think we're in a state of the world where it's adjusting to the rise of new powers, going from a unipolar to multipolar world, and how do we find ways to build that unified view of moving forward and coordinating and cooperating. Economically, it's the most efficient way to go, okay? But politics isn't certainly solely is not driven by economics.
Is the reshaping of global trade more of a challenge or an opportunity for emerging markets?
I think it's an opportunity for emerging markets in Africa and Latin America, South America. I think there's great opportunities here in this pursuit of resilience and looking for diversification for these countries to potentially find their niches in the global economy. One of the things they need is pretty transparent and stable rules in order to be able to participate. And I think the U.S. here has not been a positive contributor lately with all the sort of unilateral trade actions and the unpredictability of the second Trump administration. I think that makes many businesses and many governments concerned about what are the rules. Are they going to change tomorrow? Governments, and particularly businesses, firms, and it's firms that trade, they don't like those changes in rules.
Let's beyond the political talking points. What new framework do the U.S. and China need to protect the global trading system?
Well, they need to reach some sort of compromise and understanding as to what the principles of the global trading system are, and both have to recognize the benefits. I think the Chinese government recognizes it's benefited very significantly from the global trading system. And so this gets to the rebalancing being discussed in the 15th five-year plan, which was also discussed in the 12th five-year plan, and the 13th, and the 14th. So there's a need for this rebalancing in China to actually occur in such a way that Chinese citizens feel like they're benefiting from it, right? I think a big challenge in the United States is that the United States was affected by globalization, technological change, demographic shifts, changes in consumer preferences, and citizens in the United States and politicians blamed trade, and particularly blamed trade from China. I think that was a mistake to blame China, okay, and to blame trade. Trade did have some adverse effects on the U.S. economy, but what the U.S. economy needed, and I think what China really needs to focus on, is a set of domestic policies that facilitate the kinds of adjustments needed from whether it's a trade shock, a technology shock, AI. People invest a lot in learning a certain set of skills. And if a technology comes that disrupts their ability to earn a living from all that investment in those sets of skills, it's very hard for them to shift to a new one, right? So how do you help them? How do you facilitate that? Or how do you make sure that AI actually helps everybody, okay, rather than helping a few who own the technology and everybody else is adversely affected. So I think that's a real challenge that the US and Chinese governments need to think about, and ideally they can find ways to coordinate and cooperate on helping to develop a set of rules that make this new technology work well for society and for its citizens.
China is shifting from the world factory to a global demand center. So what institutional change does this need?
It needs to have household consumption share of GDP increase. Households need to feel comfortable that they can spend more money on things. Many Chinese households are concerned, right? They're concerned about the cost of education, of health care, retirement, the value of any homes or apartments they may have bought, right? That makes them less likely to spend a lot of money, right? So there's a challenge here for the Chinese government to ensure that households feel comfortable that they're going to be able to afford education, healthcare, retirement, and housing, and at the same time spend more money on services, vacations, going out to eat, and buying imported goods.
From your experience, what's your key policy advice for China to advance high-level opening up and keep foreign investment stable?
Stable policies that are increasingly open and competitive. So allowing foreign firms to come in and compete on a level playing field and on an equitable basis with domestic firms. That's the best way for China to open up.